Imagine waking up one morning and the country you live in simply does not exist yet. No name, no flag, no laws, no borders. Just wilderness, foreign soldiers, and the boots of a king pressing down on your neck from 3,000 miles away. That was America. That was the beginning. And the story of how 50 separate, wildly different, fiercely independent states were carved out of that chaos is one of the most dramatic, bloody, emotional, and jaw-dropping stories in all of human history. Stay right here, because what you are about to hear will completely change how you see America forever. It started with a king who pushed too far. His name was King George III of Britain. And in the mid-1700s, he owned the eastern coastline of North America like a landlord owns an apartment building. The people living there, the colonists, had built their homes, buried their children, grown their food, and bled into that soil for generations. But to King George, they were simply a source of income. He taxed their tea, he taxed their paper, he taxed their trade. He stationed his soldiers in their homes without permission and dared anyone to complain about it. And then someone did. The colonists looked at each other and said something that would echo through centuries. They said, "We are being taxed by a government we have no voice in. We are being controlled by a king we never chose. We are paying for an empire we do not belong to." And the phrase that caught fire, the phrase that spread from tavern to tavern, from colony to colony, like a flame in dry grass, was this: no taxation without representation. King George laughed. He should not have laughed. By 1775, the anger had turned into muskets. Farmers picked up rifles, blacksmiths became soldiers, school teachers became generals, and a full-scale revolution erupted against the most powerful military force on the planet at that time. People called the colonists crazy. People said it was suicide. A ragged army of tradesmen and farmers fighting the mighty British Empire. Impossible. Ridiculous. Finished before it started. But on July 4th, 1776, something happened that silenced every single critic. 56 men walked into a room in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and signed their names to a document that was essentially a death warrant if they lost. The Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, a document that looked King George directly in the eyes and said, "We are no longer yours. We are free. We are a nation, and if you want us back, you will have to kill every last one of us." The king stopped laughing. What followed was 8 brutal years of war. Winters so cold that soldiers left bloody footprints in the snow because they had no boots. Battles where entire units were wiped out before breakfast. Moments where the revolution almost died completely, where George Washington himself considered surrender. But they held. They bled. They sacrificed. And in 1783, Britain signed the Treaty of Paris and officially admitted something the whole world found shocking. America had won. 13 colonies became 13 states overnight. Delaware was first to ratify the Constitution and proudly carries the title the first state to this very day. But here is something most people never get taught in school. Rhode Island, the smallest of the 13, refused to sign the Constitution for 2.5 years. 2.5 years. While every other state was building a nation, Rhode Island sat with its arms crossed and said, "We do not trust a strong central government, and we are not signing anything until we get written guarantees of individual rights. They were stubborn, they were difficult, and honestly, they were right. Because their resistance is exactly why the Bill of Rights exists today. But here is the thing about 13 states. 13 was never going to be enough, because the men who built America were not small thinkers. They looked west, and they did not see empty land. They saw destiny. They saw expansion. They saw an empire of their own. And what happened next was a series of purchases, wars, betrayals, and outright thefts that transformed 13 coastal states into 50 states stretching from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific. The first massive move came in 1803, and it came from the most unexpected place: France. Napoleon Bonaparte, the most feared military mind in Europe, had dreams of a French empire in North America. He had plans. He had soldiers. He had ambition that frightened every country on the continent. But Napoleon had a problem. He was broke. His European wars were draining France dry, and he needed money faster than he could steal it. So he did something that stunned the entire world. He called the American ambassador into his office, and he made an offer. He said, "I will sell you Louisiana." Now, when Napoleon said Louisiana, he did not mean just the state you see on a map today. He meant 828,000 square miles of land. He meant everything from the Gulf of Mexico stretching all the way north to Canada. He meant land that would eventually become 15 separate American states. And his price for all of it? $15 million. President Thomas Jefferson nearly fell out of his chair. His hands were shaking when he read the offer. Because $15 million for 828,000 square miles worked out to roughly 3 cents per acre. 3 cents. For land that would one day hold some of the most fertile farms, the deepest rivers, and the most valuable resources on the continent. Jefferson did not sleep that night. He paced his study. He questioned whether he even had the constitutional authority to make such a purchase. But by morning, his decision was made. He bought it. And with a single transaction, America doubled in size overnight. Doubled. In one deal. From one desperate French emperor. That purchase, known as the Louisiana Purchase, is still considered the single greatest real estate deal in the history of human civilization. But America was not done. Because further west, there was land that belonged to Mexico. And America wanted it. In 1836, the first confrontation came through Texas. Texas at that time was Mexican territory, populated heavily by American settlers who had moved in with Mexico's permission. But those settlers had no intention of staying under Mexican rule. Led by figures like Sam Houston and inspired by the memory of the American Revolution, they declared independence from Mexico and fought for it. The Battle of the Alamo became the most famous moment of that fight. A fortress where fewer than 200 Texans held off thousands of Mexican soldiers for 13 days before being completely wiped out. Every single defender died. But their sacrifice bought time. And 6 weeks later, Sam Houston's army caught the Mexican general Santa Anna off guard at the Battle of San Jacinto and defeated him in 18 minutes. 18 minutes. Texas became its own independent nation, the Republic of Texas, with its own president, its own currency, its own army, its own flag. For 9 full years, Texas existed as a sovereign country. And then, in 1845, it made a decision that changed American history. It voted to join the United States. Mexico was furious, and the tension between America and Mexico exploded into full-scale war in 1846. When the dust settled 2 years later, Mexico had lost, and the peace treaty that followed forced Mexico to hand over more than 500,000 square miles of land. That land became California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, parts of Wyoming, half of the American Southwest, all of it taken from Mexico through war. Now, pause for one moment right here. And if this story is already blowing your mind, please hit that like button right now, because we are only halfway through, and what is coming next is even more shocking than what you just heard. Because the story of Alaska is one that still makes people laugh, until they find out the ending. In 1867, Russia owned Alaska, and Russia wanted nothing to do with it. The Russian government saw Alaska as a frozen wasteland, too far away to defend and too expensive to maintain. So Russia did what any government does when it wants to get rid of a problem. It tried to sell it. It approached Britain first. Britain said no. Then Russia came to America. Secretary of State William Seward said yes immediately. The price was $7.2 million for 663,000 square miles of land. The American press absolutely destroyed Seward for it. Newspapers called Alaska Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox. They mocked him relentlessly. Politicians called it a frozen embarrassment. Citizens called it a waste of money. Everyone agreed that buying Alaska was the stupidest decision in American government history. Then they found the gold. Then they found the oil. Then they found the natural gas reserves worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Then they realized that Alaska's strategic military position made it one of the most geographically important pieces of land in the entire Western Hemisphere. William Seward did not live to see his full vindication, but history gave it to him completely. If Alaska was bought with money and Texas was taken through war, then the story of Hawaii is something else entirely. Hawaii was not empty land. Hawaii was not a territory looking for a ruler. Hawaii was a kingdom. A living, breathing, sovereign nation with a royal family, a constitution, a culture thousands of years old, and a queen who believed with every fiber of her being that her people deserved to govern themselves. Her name was Queen Liliuokalani, and in 1893, a small group of American businessmen, sugar plantation owners who were making enormous profits from Hawaiian land, decided that a Hawaiian queen was bad for business. So they did something that even today the United States government has officially acknowledged as illegal. They called in American naval forces. They surrounded the royal palace with armed soldiers, and they told Queen Liliuokalani that she had two choices: step down from her throne or watch her people die. She wept. She wrote in her journal that she surrendered not because she accepted defeat, but because she refused to let her people's blood be spilled for her crown. She stepped down. She was placed under house arrest in her own palace. And Hawaii, a kingdom that had existed peacefully for centuries, was handed over to American control and eventually became the 50th state in 1959. The wound from that betrayal has never fully healed in Hawaii, and it should not be forgotten. But to understand America fully, you cannot just understand how the land was acquired. You have to understand how each state actually works. Because this is the part that confuses almost everyone outside of America. The part that even many Americans themselves do not fully grasp. America is not one country operating as a single unit. America is 50 separate governments operating under one roof. Think about that for a moment. Each of the 50 states has its own governor, a leader with enormous power over that state's daily life. Each state has its own legislature that writes its own laws. Each state has its own constitution, its own court system, its own tax structure, its own police force, its own education system, and its own identity that runs so deep that people from Texas will tell you they are Texan first and American second without blinking. This is called federalism, and it was the genius compromise that held the whole experiment together. The men who built America had just escaped a king who had too much power. The last thing they wanted was to create another king. So they designed a system where power was deliberately divided. The federal government in Washington handles national defense, foreign policy, immigration, and federal law. But everything else, and everything else is enormous, belongs to the states. This is why marijuana is completely legal in Colorado and a serious criminal offense in neighboring states. This is why the minimum wage in California is dramatically higher than the minimum wage in Mississippi. This is why Texas has no state income tax and California takes a significant percentage of every paycheck. Same country, different worlds. And that was entirely by design. But the design was not always peaceful, because the biggest crack in the American system, the wound that nearly destroyed the entire nation, was slavery. And it tore the country apart along state lines in a way that still echoes in American politics today. By the mid-1800s, the northern states had moved toward industry and were increasingly opposed to slavery. The southern states had built their entire economy on enslaved labor and were determined to protect it. Every time a new state was added to the Union, the same brutal question exploded back to the surface. Would this new state allow slavery or not? The Missouri Compromise of 1820 tried to draw a line, literally, a geographic line across the country. States above the line, free. States below, slave. Maine was separated from Massachusetts and admitted as a free state. Missouri was admitted as a slave state. Balance maintained, crisis temporarily avoided. But temporary was the only word that mattered, because the compromise held for 30 years and then shattered completely. By 1861, 11 southern states had decided that the federal government no longer represented them, and they seceded from the Union to form the Confederate States of America. What followed was the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict ever fought on American soil. 600,000 Americans dead, brother against brother, father against son. The nation ripped completely in half. And out of that war came one of the most unusual state creation stories in all of American history. Virginia had voted to join the Confederacy, but the western counties of Virginia, mountainous, less dependent on enslaved labor, more connected to the northern economy, refused to follow. They looked at what Virginia was doing and said, "Not us, not in our name." And in 1863, in the middle of the war, while bullets were still flying, they broke away from Virginia and became their own state. West Virginia, born in rebellion against a rebellion. The only state in American history created by seceding from another state during wartime. President Lincoln welcomed them immediately because he needed every free state vote he could get. Speaking of Lincoln, Nevada's story is one that makes every historian smile. Nevada, in 1864, was barely populated. It did not have nearly enough residents to qualify for statehood under normal requirements. But Lincoln was facing a brutally close re-election campaign, and he needed more states to guarantee enough electoral votes to win. So Nevada was fast-tracked, rushed through. Its entire state constitution, a document thousands of words long, was transmitted to Washington by telegraph. The longest telegram in American history up to that point. The telegraph operators worked in shifts for hours transmitting it, and Nevada became a state just 8 days before the election. 8 days. Politics has always been part of how America grows, and nowhere is that political reality more painful than in the story of Oklahoma. In the 1830s, the United States government forcibly removed entire Native American nations from their ancestral homelands in the southeastern states. The Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole. They were marched at gunpoint across hundreds of miles to a territory that the government officially designated as permanent Indian land. The journey was so brutal, so filled with starvation, disease, and death, that the Cherokee called it Nuna Daul Tsuni, the trail where they cried, the trail of tears. The government made a promise: this land is yours forever. No white settlement, no interference, a permanent homeland for the people who had already lost everything. Then, in the 1880s, they found oil. The promise evaporated overnight. Settlers flooded in. The government reclassified the territory, and in 1907, Oklahoma became an American state. The native nations, who had been promised that land forever, watched it happen with a grief that no words in any language have ever been able to fully capture. These are the stories underneath the map. These are the costs that textbooks skip over. These are the wounds that explain so much of what America is still wrestling with today. And America is still not finished. Because right now, today, in the 21st century, there are millions of people living under the American flag who have no real political voice. And the debate over whether America will ever have a 51st state is one of the most charged political conversations happening in Washington. Puerto Rico has been an American territory since 1898. More than 3 million American citizens live there. They pay certain federal taxes. Their young men and women serve in the American military. They carry American passports, but they cannot vote for president. They have no senators in Congress. They have no full voting representation in the government that controls their lives. Puerto Rico has voted multiple times in favor of becoming a state, and every time Congress has quietly buried the conversation, because adding Puerto Rico means adding 2 new senators and new electoral votes, and both political parties are terrified of what that would mean for their power. Washington, D.C. has 700,000 residents, more people than the entire state of Wyoming, more people than the entire state of Vermont. These residents pay full federal income tax. Their children grow up as American citizens. but they have no voting representative in Congress. Their license plates, the license plates on the cars driving past the Capitol building every single day, say 4 words that are both a protest and a prophecy. Taxation without representation. The same words that started the revolution in the first place. America built itself on the idea that no person should be governed without a voice. And yet in 2024, millions of Americans are living that exact injustice. The argument for adding new states is simple and moral. The argument against it is purely political. And the tension between those two realities is something America has not yet found the courage to resolve. Now, here is the final thought. The one that will stay with you long after this video ends. America is 248 years old. The Egyptian pyramids were built 4,500 years ago. The Roman Empire ruled the known world for 1,000 years. Chinese civilization stretches back 5,000 years. The great dynasties of Africa built empires that lasted centuries before Europe even knew the American continent existed. And yet in just 248 years, a blink in the timeline of human civilization, 13 struggling coastal colonies became 50 states. A nation that could not feed its own revolutionary army in winter became the largest economy on Earth. A country whose founders wrote that all men are created equal while owning enslaved human beings has spent 248 years in a painful, violent, beautiful, and unfinished struggle to actually mean those words. America is not a finished story. It never was. Every state on that map carries joy and carries shame, carries triumph and carries blood, carries the dreams of people who came with nothing and the grief of people who had everything taken. And the most honest thing anyone can say about America is exactly what makes it so endlessly fascinating to the entire world. It is still trying to figure out what it is. And if this video made you see America, or your own country, through completely different eyes, then you owe it to yourself to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, because every single week we are bringing you the stories that history books were too afraid to tell. The real stories, the emotional stories, the ones that change how you think. And before you leave, drop a comment below. Tell us which state story shocked you the most. Was it Hawaii? Was it Oklahoma? Was it West Virginia, born in the middle of a war? Tell us down below, because your answer might just become our next video. Like this video if it opened your eyes. Share it with someone who thinks they already know everything about America. Because now you know the truth. And the truth, as always, is far more powerful than anything they taught you in school.